Chapter 2 of Bulfinch's Age of Chivalry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Age of Chivalry by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 2. The Mythical History of England. The illustrious poet, Milton, in his History of England, is the author whom we chiefly follow in this chapter. According to the earliest accounts, Albion, a giant, and son of Neptune, a contemporary of Hercules, ruled over the island to which he gave his name. Presuming to oppose the progress of Hercules in his western march, he was slain by him. Another story is that Histion, the son of Japhet, the son of Noah, had 4 sons, Francus, Romanus, Alemanus, and Brito, from whom descended the French, Roman, German, and British people. Rejecting these and other like stories, Milton gives more regard to the story of Brutus, the Trojan, which, he says, is supported by descents of ancestry long continued, laws and exploits not plainly seeming to be borrowed or devised, which, on the common belief, have wrought no small impression, defended by many, denied utterly by few. The principal authority is Geoffrey of Monmouth, whose history, written in the 12th century, purports to be a translation of a history of Britain, brought over from the opposite shore of France, which, under the name of Brittany, was chiefly peopled by natives of Britain, who from time to time emigrated thither, driven from their own country by the inroads of the Picts and Scots. According to this authority, Brutus was the son of Silvius, and he of Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, whose flight from Troy and settlement in Italy are narrated in stories of gods and heroes. Brutus, at the age of 15, attending his father to the chase, unfortunately killed him with an arrow. Banished, therefore, by his kindred, he sought refuge in the part of Greece where Helenus, with a band of Trojan exiles, had become established. But Helenus was now dead, and the descendants of the Trojans were oppressed by Pandranus, the king of the country. Brutus, being kindly received among them, so throve in virtue and in arms as to win the regard of all the eminent of the land, above all others of his age. In consequence of this the Trojans not only began to hope, but secretly to persuade them to lead them the way to liberty. To encourage them, they had the promise of help from Assaracus, a noble Greek youth, whose mother was a Trojan. He had suffered wrong at the hands of the king, and for that reason the more willingly cast in his lot with the Trojan exiles. Choosing a fit opportunity, Brutus with his countrymen withdrew to the woods and hills, as the safest place from which to expostulate, and sent this message to Pandrasus: that the Trojans, holding it unworthy of their ancestors to serve in a foreign land, had retreated to the woods, choosing rather a savage life than a slavish one. If that displeased him, then, with his leave, they would depart to some other country. Pandrasus, not expecting so bold a message from the sons of captives, went in pursuit of them, with such forces as he could gather, and met them on the banks of the Achelous, where Brutus got the advantage, and took the king captive. The result was, that the terms demanded by the Trojans were granted. The king gave his daughter Imogen in marriage to Brutus, and furnished shipping, money, and fit provisions for them all to depart from the land. The marriage being solemnized, and shipping from all parts got together, the Trojans, in a fleet of no less than 320 sail, betook themselves to the sea. On the 3rd day they arrived at a certain island, which they found destitute of inhabitants, though there were appearances of former habitation, and among the ruins a temple of Diana. Brutus, here performing sacrifice at the shrine of the goddess, invoked an oracle for his guidance, in these lines: Goddess of shades, and huntress, who at will walk'st on the rolling sphere and through the deep, on thy 3rd realm, the earth, look now, and tell what land, what seat of rest, thou biddest me seek, what certain seat where I may worship thee, for I, with temples vowed and virgin choirs. To whom, sleeping before the altar, Diana in a vision thus answered: Brutus, far to the west, in the ocean wide, beyond the realm of Gaul, a land there lies, sea-girt it lies, where giants dwelt of old. Now, void, it fits thy people. Thither bend thy course, there shalt thou find a lasting seat. There to thy sons another Troy shall rise, and kings be born of thee, whose dreaded might shall awe the world, and conquer nations bold. Brutus, guided now, as he thought, by divine direction, sped his course towards the west, and arriving at a place on the Tyrrhene Sea, found there the descendants of certain Trojans, who, with Antenor, came into Italy, of whom Corianus was the chief. These joined company, and the ships pursued their way till they arrived at the mouth of the river Loire, in France, where the expedition landed, with a view to settlement, but were so rudely assaulted by the inhabitants that they put to sea again, and arrived at a part of the coast of Britain, now called Devonshire, where Brutus felt convinced that he had found the promised end of his voyage, landed his colony, and took possession. The island, not yet Britain, but Albion, was in a manner desert and unhospitable, occupied only by a remnant of the giant race, whose excessive force and tyranny had destroyed the others. The Trojans encountered these and extirpated them, Corineus in particular signalizing himself by his exploits against them, from whom Cornwall takes its name, for that region fell to his lot, and there the hugest giants dwelt, lurking in rocks and caves, till Corineus rid the land of them. Brutus built his capital city, and called it Troyanova, New Troy, changed in time to Trinovantus, now London, and having governed the isle 24 years, died, leaving 3 sons, Locrine, Albanact, and Camber. Locrine had the middle part, Camber the west, called Cambria from him, and Albanact Albania, now Scotland. Locrine was married to Gwendolen, the daughter of Corineus, but having seen a fair maid named Estrildis, who had been brought captive from Germany, he became enamoured of her, and had by her a daughter, whose name was Sabra. This matter was kept secret while Corineus lived, but after his death Locrine divorced Gwendolen, and made Estrildis his queen. Gwendolen, all enraged, departed to Cornwall, where Madon, her son, lived, who had been brought up by Corineus, his grandfather. Gathering an army of her father's friends and subjects, she gave battle to her husband's forces, and Locrine was slain. Gwendolen caused her rival, Estrildis, with her daughter Sabra, to be thrown into the river, from which cause the river thenceforth bore the maiden's name, which by length of time is now changed into Sabrina or Severn. Milton alludes to this in his address to the rivers Severn Swift, guilty of maiden's death, and in his Comus tells the story with a slight variation thus: There is a gentle nymph not far from hence, that with moist curb sways the smooth Severn stream. Sabrina is her name, a virgin pure. Whilome she was the daughter of Locrine, that had the sceptre from his father Bruta. She, guiltless damsel, flying the mad pursuit of her enraged stepdame, Gwendolen, commended her fair innocence to the flood, that stayed her knight with his cross-flowing course, the water nymphs that in the bottom played, held up their pearled wrists and took her in, bearing her straight to aged Nereus' hall, who, piteous of her woes, reared her lank head, and gave her to his daughters to embathe in nectared lavers strewed with asphodel, and through the porch and inlet of each sense dropped in ambrosial oils till she revived, and underwent a quick immortal change, made goddess of the river, etc. If our readers ask when all this took place, we must answer, in the first place, that mythology is not careful of dates, and next, that as Brutus was the great-grandson of Aeneas, it must have been not far from a century subsequent to the Trojan War, or about 1100 years before the invasion of the island by Julius Caesar. This long interval is filled with the names of princes whose chief occupation was in warring with one another. Some few, whose names remained connected with places, or embalmed in literature, we will mention. Bloded. Bloded built the city of Bath, and dedicated the medicinal waters to Minerva. He was a man of great invention, and practised the arts of magic, till, having made him wings to fly, he fell down upon the temple of Apollo, in Trinovant, and so died, after 20 years' reign. Lear. Lear, who next reigned, built Leicester, and called it after his name. He had no male issue, but only 3 daughters. When grown old, he determined to divide his kingdom among his daughters, and bestow them in marriage. But first, to try which of them loved him best, he determined to ask them solemnly in order, and judge of the warmth of their affection by their answers. Goneril, the eldest, knowing well her father's weakness, made answer that she loved him above her soul. "Since thou so honourest my declining age," said the old man, "to thee and to thy husband I give the 3rd part of my realm." Such good success for a few words soon uttered was ample instruction to Regan, the 2nd daughter, what to say. She therefore to the same question replied that she loved him more than all the world beside, and so received an equal reward with her sister. But Cordelia, the youngest, and hitherto the best beloved, though having before her eyes the reward of a little easy soothing, and the loss likely to attend plain dealing, yet was not moved from the solid purpose of a sincere and virtuous answer, and replied, "Father, my love towards you is as my duty bids; they who pretend beyond this is flatter." When the old man, sorry to hear this, and wishing her to recall these words, persisted in asking, she still restrained her expressions, so as to say rather less than more than the truth. Then Lear, all in a passion, burst forth, "Since thou hast not reverenced thy aged father like thy sisters, think not to have any part in my kingdom, or what else I have." And without delay, giving in marriage his other daughters, Goneril to the Duke of Albany, and Regan to the Duke of Cornwall, he divides his kingdom between them, and goes to reside with his eldest daughter, attended only by 100 knights. But in a short time his attendants, being complained of as too numerous and disorderly, are reduced to 30. Resenting that affront, the old king betakes him to his second daughter, but she, instead of soothing his wounded pride, takes part with her sister, and refuses to admit a retinue of more than 5. Then back he returns to the other, who now will not receive him with more than 1 attendant. Then the remembrance of Cordelia comes to his thoughts, and he takes his journey into France to seek her, with little hope of kind consideration from one whom he had so injured, but to pay her the last recompense he can render, confession of his injustice. When Cordelia is informed of his approach, and of his sad condition, she pours forth true filial tears. And not willing that her own or others' eyes should see him in that forlorn condition, she sends one of her trusted servants to meet him, and convey him privately to some comfortable abode, and to furnish him with such a state as befitted his dignity. After which Cordelia, with the king her husband, went in state to meet him, and after an honourable reception the king permitted his wife, Cordelia, to go with an army and set her father again upon his throne. They prospered, subdued the wicked sisters and their consorts, and Lear obtained the crown and held it 3 years. Cordelia succeeded him and reigned 5 years, but the sons of her sisters, after that, rebelled against her, and she lost both her crown and her life. Shakespeare has chosen this story as the subject of his tragedy of King Lear, varying its details in some respects. The madness of Lear, and the ill success of Cordelia's attempt to reinstate her father, are the principal variations, and those in the names will also be noticed. Our narrative is drawn from Milton's History, and thus the reader will perceive that the story of Lear has had the distinguished honour of being told by the 2 acknowledged chiefs of British literature. Ferrex and Porrex. Ferrex and Porrex were brothers, who held the kingdom after Lear. They quarrelled about the supremacy, and Porrex expelled his brother, who, having obtained aid from Suard, king of the Franks, returned and made war upon Porrex. Ferrex was slain in battle and his forces dispersed. When their mother came to hear of her son's death, who was her favourite, she fell into a great rage, and conceived a mortal hatred against the survivor. She took, therefore, her opportunity when he was asleep, fell upon him, and with the assistance of her women tore him in pieces. This horrid story would not be worth relating, were it not for the fact that it has furnished the plot for the first tragedy which was written in the English language. It was entitled Gorboduc, but in the second edition Ferrex and Porrex, and was the production of Thomas Sackville, afterwards Earl of Dorset, and Thomas Norton, a barrister. Its date was 1561. Dunwallo Molmutius. This is the next name of note. Molmutius established the Mummelsteen laws, which bestowed the privilege of sanctuary on temples, cities, and the roads leading to them, and gave the same protection to ploughs, extending a religious sanction to the labours of the field. Shakespeare alludes to him in Cymbeline, Act 3, Scene 1. Molmutius made our laws, who was the first of Britain which did put his brows within a golden crown, and called himself a king. Brennus and Belinus. The sons of Molmutius succeeded him. They quarrelled, and Brennus was driven out of the island, and took refuge in Gaul, where he met with such favour from the king of the Allobroges that he gave him his daughter in marriage, and made him his partner on the throne. Brennus is the name which the Roman historians give to the famous leader of the Gauls, who took Rome in the time of Camillus. Geoffrey of Monmouth claims the glory of the conquest for the British prince, after he had become king of the Allobroges. Elidure. After Belinus and Brennus there reigned several kings of little note, and then came Elidure. Arthgallo, his brother, being king, gave great offence to his powerful nobles, who rose against him, deposed him, and advanced Elidure to the throne. Arthgallo fled, and endeavoured to find assistance in the neighbouring kingdoms to reinstate him, but found none. Elidure reigned prosperously and wisely. After 5 years' possession of the kingdom, one day, when hunting, he met in the forest his brother, Arthgallo, who had been deposed. After long wandering, unable longer to bear the poverty to which he was reduced, he had returned to Britain, with only 10 followers, designing to repair to those who had formerly been his friends. Elidure, at the sight of his brother in distress, forgetting all animosities, ran to him, and embraced him. He took Arthgallo home with him, and concealed him in the palace. After this he feigned himself sick, and calling his nobles about him, induced them, partly by persuasion, partly by force, to consent to his abdicating the kingdom, and reinstating his brother on the throne. The agreement being ratified, Elidure took the crown from his own head, and put it on his brother's head. Arthgallo, after this, reigned 10 years, well and wisely, exercising strict justice towards all men. He died, and left the kingdom to his sons, who reigned with various fortunes, but were not long lived, and left no offspring, so that Elidure was again advanced to the throne, and finished the course of his life in just and virtuous actions, receiving the name of the Pious, from the love and admiration of his subjects. Wordsworth has taken the story of Artegal and Elidure for the subject of a poem, which is No. 2 of Poems Founded on the Affections. Lud. After Elidure, the chronicle names many kings, but none of special note, till we come to Lud, who greatly enlarged Trinovant, his capital, and surrounded it with a wall. He changed its name, bestowing upon it his own, so that henceforth it was called Ludstown, afterwards London. Lud was buried by the gate of the city, called after him Ludgate. He had 2 sons, but they were not old enough at the time of their father's death to sustain the cares of government, and therefore their uncle, Caswallaun or Cassibellaunus, succeeded to the kingdom. He was a brave and magnificent prince, so that his fame reached to distant countries. Cassibellaunus. About this time it happened, as is found in the Roman histories, that Julius Caesar, having subdued Gaul, came to the shore opposite Britain. And having resolved to add this island also to his conquests, he prepared ships and transported his army across the sea, to the mouth of the river Thames. Here he was met by Cassibellaun with all his forces, and a battle ensued, in which Nennius, the brother of Cassibellaun, engaged in single combat with Caesar. After several furious blows given and received, the sword of Caesar stuck so fast in the shield of Nennius that it could not be pulled out, and the combatants being separated by the intervention of the troops, Nennius remained possessed of this trophy. At last, after the greater part of the day was spent, the Britons poured in so fast that Caesar was forced to retire to his camp and fleet. And finding it useless to continue the war any longer at that time, he returned to Gaul. Shakespeare alludes to Cassibellaunus in Cymbeline. The famed Cassibellaun, who was once at point, O Giglat Fortune, to master Caesar's sword, made Lud's town with rejoicing fires bright, and Britons strut with courage. Cymbelinus, or Cymbeline. Caesar, on a second invasion of the island, was more fortunate, and compelled the Britons to pay tribute. Cymbeline, the nephew of the king, was delivered to the Romans as a hostage for the faithful fulfilment of the treaty, and being carried to Rome by Caesar, he was there brought up in the Roman arts and accomplishments. Being afterwards restored to his country, and placed on the throne, he was attached to the Romans, and continued through all his reign at peace with them. His sons, Guiderius and Arviragus, who made their appearance in Shakespeare's play of Cymbeline, succeeded their father, and refusing to pay tribute to the Romans, brought on another invasion. Guiderius was slain, but Arviragus afterward made terms with the Romans, and reigned prosperously many years. Armorica. The next event of note is the conquest and colonization of Armorica, by Maximus, a Roman general, and Conan, lord of Miniadoc, or Denebau land, in Wales. The name of the country was changed to Brittany, or Lesser Britain, and so completely was it possessed by the British colonists, that the language became assimilated to that spoken in Wales, and it is said that to this day the peasantry of the 2 countries can understand each other when speaking their native language. The Romans eventually succeeded in establishing themselves in the island, and after the lapse of several generations, they became blended with the natives, so that no distinction existed between the 2 races. When at length the Roman armies were withdrawn from Britain, their departure was a matter of regret to the inhabitants, as it left them without protection against the barbarous tribes, Scots, Picts, and Norwegians, who harassed the country incessantly. This was the state of things when the era of King Arthur began. The adventure of Albion, the giant, with Hercules, is alluded to by Spenser, Faerie Queene, Book IV, Canto 11. For Albion the son of Neptune was, who, for the proof of his great puissance, out of his Albion did on dry foot pass, into old Gaul, that is now cleped France, to fight with Hercules, that did advance to vanquish all the world with matchless might, and there his mortal part by great mischance was slain. End of Chapter 2.